Muslim women of Canada were the ones most vociferously against parallel Sharia courts because of the fact that they would get forced and coerced behind the scenes into these courts.
And I don't disagree with that, but there's a difference between calling the people who are saying that Sharia tribunals should be established because they give better access to justice, or whatever their reasons are. There's a difference between them and Al-Qaeda, and I think that the documentary conflates those two, and that is very, very dangerous.
The only difference is the means. The only difference is the violent means.
I'd like to make a few comments in light of this conversation about the documentary, and the first is that when Zuhdi in the documentary refers to the majority of Muslims in America as having an Islamist inclination, I think that is not backed up by any evidence. I think it's entirely speculative and, as a matter of fact, completely incorrect. Well, I think the majority of Muslims in America are moderates who aspire to live by the Constitution, are defenders of the Constitution as represented in their organizations like CAIR and MPAC and others, and as a matter of fact do not have any interest in seeing the Constitution be trumped for some kind of religious law.
So CAIR is a perfect example of what is really an Islamic political party. It doesn't limit itself to civil rights issues.
Not in the least bit.
It limits. It goes into foreign policy, domestic policy,
make it an Islamic
and I have yet to see a paper out of CAIR.
Don't the Presbyterians? Don't the Presbyterians have opinions about?
But they don't present themselves as civil rights organizations. And also, you have not written anything condemning the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamist organizations.
See, that's exactly. I don't understand.
Tell me one thing you've written against the establishment of Islamic State.
Let me turn that around. Let me just turn that around so we don't get involved on accusations. What would he do to satisfy you that he was appropriately representing his Muslim faith and his own political agenda in the United States? What kinds of statements would you need to hear from him for that to satisfy you?
I would ask for the articulation of the fact that Islam should separate religion and politics, that you should articulate that the U.S. Constitution and our form of government is the ultimate form of government, that if Muslims were a majority, you would not seek to put into place. I was at the Islamic Society of North America in 1993 as a naval officer, and Siraj Wahhaj held up the Quran and said that this is what should be the Constitution for America.
Is it possible, given the circumstances of the world today, and I think the documentary alludes to them, for an Islamic organization, say in Pakistan, in Saudi Arabia, Syria, Egypt, to have a high-minded idea of, well, we're going to do something to help Muslim Americans in the United States and, come up with some sort of charitable mission, and have it not be interpreted as some sort of invasion, hitting the beach and trying to sort of propagandize Islam in the United States for nefarious reasons?
I'm not under this current framework. It seems that, every time, it's just the fact comes from, from the original problem, which is that the Muslim community is under so much scrutiny right now that absolutely everything can be taken as an argument for, some sort of foreign, involvement or some sort of nefarious plot. Everything that, individual Muslims do, and that's a lot of pressure as a Muslim American, to have every single action that you do to be somehow like representative of the community. But, another, I think, important point in which we were talking about was the whole parallel court issue. And I think that deserves a lot of attention because it's coming up again and again in Western societies, and I teach this issue, so I know it very well. And the problem is that in most of these countries, not in Ontario, but especially in Denmark, you've got a Muslim population that is ghettoized, 60% of which is living under poverty, the poverty rate for the rest of the population in the EU. Okay, so as far as like a parallel community, it is already a parallel community. And part of their articulations for things like separate courts or the rest of it are a problem that show a problem in the structure of Denmark and their failure to provide access.
Is there precedent for parallel courts, parallel jurisprudence?
In Canada, where this problem came up, the Hasidic Jews had, religious arbitration for many, many years. But when the issue came up for Muslims, and I agree with you that there are many, many problems with Sharia law, and that Sharia law needs reform. And there are many Muslim scholars.
Dr. Johnson, do you think the creation of a parallel court in a community like the one in Denmark, or even in Canada or in the United States, do you think it would constitute a slippery slope down which all would be lost for American democracy, or would it be more of a pressure valve releasing tension within a community that needs a form of its own indigenous expression of things like justice?
I'm a libertarian, small L, in my civil rights beliefs, and I'll tell you, I don't believe there's a need for it. because you can always go through arbitration. Two families, two people having an issue, they can go to arbitration if they have a problem. To separate it, it becomes an incubator for radicalism, for fundamentalism. And actually, if a woman, for example, who right now the Islamic culture, as much as we want to deny it, is still very misogynistic. They bring over that baggage with them. And that baggage is only going to be released.
That's a general statement.
I'm just saying there's a lot of persecution of women done by
not
men
in the last few
Islamic
minutes. In the
community.
last few minutes that we have, let's frame
And
that
the way
directly.
to change that is by...
In the documentary, it's posited that all of the conflict politically between Islam and the secular world revolves around women's rights. Do you go along with that?
Women's rights are important, and there's a lot to be desired. And I think that reformers are working to bring the level to the Islamic standard. I would say the Prophet standard were the high standards that we can aspire to. But the point I want to make about the documentary is that it fits right into the sensationalist tendency or trend that we see when talking about, engaging in the discourse on Muslims in the West today. And I think that's a problem. For example,
but
a lot
are
of
cartoonists, do they deserve their fate if they make the wrong kind of drawing?
No, I believe in freedom of expression and freedom of speech, and I support the rights of cartoonists to attack Islam or criticize Islam. But the point I'm making is, in the discourse on Islam, as we bring in Arabic words and transliterate them into the English language, if we fail to define them appropriately, that then debunks the entire conversation or discussion that we can have. It derails it. When we talk about dawah, and it's misdefined in the film severely, it's referred to as, the Arabic word dawah, as the mass conversion of society.
It's loosely defined as conversion.
Not in the least bit. The word dawah
Dawah
actually means
education.
No, it means actually invitation to the faith, and it's not unlike what is in Christianity, bearing witness, which is actually an obligation in Christianity longer than it has been in Islam. It's not at all the
Although you could turn
movement.
up the heat on Christian.
It was in reference to Saudi funding, by the way.
Christian evangelical.
It can be misinterpreted, it can be exploited, just like anything else, but the actual definition of the word itself is not this sinister movement of converting society despite of themselves, but rather professing your own beliefs and engaging in intellectual conversation.
Ms. Zakaria, your thoughts on women's rights as the sort of nexus of conflict between moderates and so-called extremists?
I think that's absolutely true. I think that women. There's definitely a lot of need, a severe and urgent need for reform in their interpretation of Sharia law. And there are many Muslim women who are working on this issue. What is terrible, though, is that both sides are using that issue in a lot of ways to kind of substantiate their own arguments without actually engaging with what it means to be a Muslim woman and what kind of identity choices that you want to make. I don't think that Muslim women want to renounce either their faith or being American. They want both, and it's entirely possible to have both. The purpose of documentaries should be to show the complexity of what Islam is without posing a question as in, we're going to choose which looks more attractive to us as a Western audience. And the film is very surreptitious in doing that, but that's essentially what the viewer thinks. Okay, well, of course I like these poor persecuted moderate people better.
So
that's definitely the assumption.
You don't view political Islam as a problem at all?
Political Islam in what sense? I mean, political Islam is in Al-Qaeda,
as far as the establishment of Islamic
horrible.
states as a
But
problem
that's not-
for American security
That's not how
and
it's defined by the
terrorism?
majority of Muslims. For the
that's
majority of
not.
Muslims, political Islam means social activism, just as it meant for the Prophet. And so
It doesn't mean Iran.
What does the Islamic State mean?
No, not necessarily at all.
It doesn't
That's
mean the
one
establishment of a
interpretation.
state in which the
Listen.
president has to be Muslim?
Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, political Islam means being active in your society politically per the standards of that society.
And
using
why
the,
should,
using the values
if I'm
of
going to go to
Islam.
mosque and pray, shouldn't I not care whether the guy standing next to me is a Democrat, Republican, Communist, or Socialist? What does my politics have to do with my faith?
When we talk about social activism, we talk about standing up for social justice, and that's exactly what organizations
That's a
like CAIR and
euphemism
other.
that the Muslim Brotherhood uses to
not true.
abuse and hijack our pulpits for their own political agendas.
That's how you view it. But how we view it is that it's social justice, no different from Confucius or Buddha or Martin
But not in
Luther
the name of Islam.
King.
And you do it in the name of